You're listening to the Hustled Up Podcast. I'm Laura Natoli.
And I'm Holly Silva, and we are best friends since birth turned multi-passionate entrepreneurs and co-owners of Chores and More, a successful service-based business where everybody is treated like a best friend.
Welcome to our show where tactical business education meets fun and real conversations about this wild journey called life.
Get ready to be inspired. Grab your headphones, turn up the volume, and let's hustle up.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Hustled Up Podcast. I am your host. My name is Holly, and don't worry, Laura will be here in today's episode, but she could not be here for this intro recording because she's a busy bee. So I'm here and I'm going to introduce our episode today. But before I do that, I do want to remind you that if you love what you see, please leave us those 5 stars. Leave us a love letter wherever you are listening. And if you're on YouTube, a little thumbs up and subscribing to the channel goes a long way. So if you could do that, I would love you forever. Now, I'm going to talk about today's episode. We had an amazing guest on. Her name is Rayna Rokicki. And if you have been wanting to either start a podcast, if you haven't started one yet, or you've been wanting to level up your current podcast, honey, this is the episode for you. Rayna drops some serious golden nuggets on all things podcasting, and she is a podcast growth coach. She does coaching to help people start a podcast and to help them grow their podcast after it's already been started. So she helps you through all stages of the process. And let me just say, I was taking notes the entire show because she was dropping some serious knowledge on the best tips to get started, how to promote your podcast for free, how to get more listeners, how to monetize your podcast, and how to use podcasting to grow your business. So seriously, there is so much goodness there. This is an episode you don't want to miss. If you want to learn about all things podcasting, then please keep on listening.
Are you tired of spending your entire weekend cleaning when you could be going out to brunch with your girls?
First of all, I love brunch. And second of all, yes, there are so many things I could be doing instead of cleaning my house on the weekend.
Oh yeah, like playing video games.
Or watching a movie with the kids.
Going on a date with your significant other.
Taking your dog to the dog park.
Going to the movies.
Solving world hunger.
Yes! Exactly. So this is why it is such a good idea to call up Chores and More for your deep and recurring cleaning needs.
And do you want to know something really cool?
What?
If anybody mentions Hustled Up when they call to book, they can receive up to $100 off their deep cleaning.
Up to $100 off. What are you doing still sitting there? Pick up the phone now, mention our podcast, and never have to spend your weekends cleaning again.
Simply go to choresandmorellc.com. You can fill out a request quote form there, or give us a call, send us a text, 631-397-0177. It is time to get back to doing the things you love. Let us take care of the cleaning. Rayna, welcome to the Hustled Up Podcast. We are so excited to have you on our show today. And to be honest, I feel like I can learn a lot from today's episode. So this is really great. Thank you for being here.
Awesome. Thanks, Holly and Laura. I'm excited to be here too. I love chatting about all things podcasting. So let's dive in.
All right. Well, the first and foremost thing that we're going to do is ask you to just introduce yourself to our listeners, a little bit about you, what you do, where you come from. Tell us your entire story. No.
Okay. All right, here goes. I'll try not to make this too long. My name is Rayna Rokicki. I am a podcast growth coach and producer. I primarily work with really rad female entrepreneurs who want to use a podcast to grow their business. I've been in the podcasting space for several years now, and I'm kind of a nerd, so I love to just dive deep into everything and learn it all, so you don't have to do it. Before that, actually, I was a middle school and high school teacher. I taught English and history and even dance. And actually, my family and I, we were international teachers, so we were living in Lagos, Nigeria, of all places, for 6 years. Yeah, it was super cool, great West African school, a lot of kids from all over the world. But then we came back during COVID, and my kids were still pretty little, and, childcare was not an option at that time. So I was looking for a career that just allowed me a little more flexibility and also a different challenge. When I was in college, I studied communications, and to be honest, with my students, I did a lot of audio video projects. So I kind of dove into that world, and I first started working for this woman who is a productivity coach. She had a podcast, YouTube channel, loved it. And then I just, like I said, took a deep dive and started my own company. And here I am. So like I said, I help podcasters. I also have 2 podcasts. I have a podcast called You Betcha She Did. And it's all about really cool women entrepreneurs from the Midwest. I'm from Sheboygan, Wisconsin. It's the Malibu of the Midwest, if anybody knows where that is. There's a lot of surfing here, believe it or not, and kiteboarding. And then I'm actually starting a new podcast that airs in a couple weeks. It's called Podcast Growth Club. And it's all about strategies and tips to grow your podcast like a business. So ideally, I want to teach people how to create an ELF podcast. And ELF stands for easy, lucrative, and fun. And who doesn't want that, right? We all do.
I love that.
I've never heard that before. An elf podcast. I want an elf podcast.
Yes. Yes, you do.
I love
That's so
that.
good.
Awesome.
Okay, so I know you had said you kind of like, oh, you have a question, Laura? You first. You could tell we're both eager.
Oh, I would just very eager. We were both so excited for this episode and a chance to talk with you because, you know, like I said, we want an elf podcast. So I'm just curious as to what made you get into podcasting specifically. Like, is it just something that you've always been passionate about? Like, what was that turning point where you were like, this is what I want to do and this is how I want to help other women in this space?
Yeah. I mean, I've always loved storytelling. Like years ago in my college years, I wanted to be like a documentary filmmaker. And then, I don't know if you remember, maybe it was like 10, 15 years ago, this podcast, one of the first podcasts came out and it was called Serial. And it was about this real life, like high school student who was convicted of murder. It was like one of the first true crime podcasts. And I was like, whoa, this is so fascinating, like how they were telling the story. And so I've always loved audio as a way to learn, especially because, I mean, I'm a mom, and I bet there's a lot of moms in this audience. And podcasts are one of the only things you can do where you're multitasking. You can like be driving, running errands, folding laundry. You know, I could clean the house for hours, to be honest. I'm listening to a podcast. I'm just like, learning and listening. So it was because of that I was like, oh, I love this format of podcasts. And so yeah, it's just something that really resonated with me, and I feel like it's a great space for women, especially to get into, because it's not a super expensive price point. It's very democratic. You can show up, people can find you, listen to you. You don't need a gigantic audience to build super fans and loyalty and people who resonate with your message. And so I feel like there's a lot of power in that, and I don't know, it's just a place I want to be.
I love that. Do you find, I feel like now we've there's been like I don't know, I could be wrong, but it feels like there's been a shift from just audio to also video. Have you had any thoughts on that? Do you think audio is more powerful? Do you like the video? I have to know. I have to pick your brain.
Yeah, great question. Personally, I'm more of an audio person because I like to multitask while I listen. But that being said, however, I feel like if you are trying to grow an audience, you should do both. And there's a couple ways you can do that, right? I mean, YouTube is there, it's free. So if you're recording a video podcast like we are right now, just put the episode out. Why not? But some people aren't comfortable with that. They're like, I still want to keep an audio podcast. So you can keep your audio podcast. You can put it on YouTube as just audio with like a static image. But you can use, the video podcast to create a reel or a YouTube short, which you can use for both, and just use that as a teaser to grow your audience, because they really are two separate audiences. There's the people who just love audio and will forever be audio people. And then there's a whole other group of people who love video and will be the video people. So why not get to both of those audiences, right? And bring them to you, to your content.
I love that. That makes perfect sense. I agree. I'm more of an audio person too, because I was really introduced to podcasts when I was still cleaning, when I was still, cleaning in the field. So I would always, put the podcast on and just clean and listen. And, I loved it. But I agree. It's important to, utilize all the forms of media to kind of get yourself out there. So that's great. Let's dive into some nitty-gritty podcast stuff. So first, I want to kind of address people who don't yet have a podcast, but they're thinking about starting one. Maybe some like rapid-fire tips or things that they need to know before launching their podcast. What would you say are like the most important things they should know?
Yeah, I think if you have a business, especially if you're like a service-based business or a coach, a podcast is a perfect way to get your content out there and find your people. It's pretty low price point, right? And you're already making content that you're putting out on LinkedIn, on Instagram, wherever your people are. So why not just make a podcast episode, repurpose it for all those things? It just makes sense, right? And also, I mean, one of the magic bits about podcasting is you become a habit in someone's life. When you produce a show that comes out weekly, and that's really key, you want to be consistent in keeping those episodes coming out weekly. You're part of their everyday routine. So like every Wednesday, maybe they're listening to while they work out or walk the dog or whatever it is. And through that weekly habit of you getting inside their head, they get to know you, they get to trust you. I mean, that is so powerful. I can't think of many other forms of media where you are with that person all the time. Because even on Instagram or TikTok, things like that, you're just with them for like a couple seconds, maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute, and it's quick. You're not really lingering in their head. You're not forming that relationship. And podcasting has the power to do that. And to be honest, I feel like people are recognizing that. I mean, every month there's thousands of new podcasts that get released into the world. And sometimes people ask like, oh, is it getting saturated? But it's not, because you don't need a gigantic audience to make the podcast work for your business or to monetize it. And that's awesome. And people start podcasts, they stop podcasts. I mean, YouTube's kind of the same thing, right? There's thousands of people who start YouTube channels, but you don't need a lot of people. You need 1,000 true fans to really start to monetize that. So I'm all about it. It's not that hard. The technology is great. The mic price point, the programs are getting better and better as far as editing, getting your processes in place. So yeah, if you're thinking about it, there's tons of programs out there. I mean, reach out. I do a really quick, like guided 12-week program to teach you everything, but you can do it on yourself too. I mean, why not is my question. When you say why, I say, why not?
I love that. That is so good, because I feel like a lot of people, from what I'm hearing, are saying, oh, podcasting is so oversaturated right now. Everybody, wants a podcast. And that's such an interesting way to think about it. If you are becoming a part of somebody's daily routine, or weekly routine rather, I love that. And that consistency, I think, is what's so important to growing your podcast, because I feel like consistency with anything you do is the hardest thing to maintain, right? Like, it's really hard. It's easy to do something for a month. It's really hard to be consistent for a year or longer. So I think that consistency is really, really key. We know. Holly's shaking her head because she's like, yep, we've struggled with that.
I know, but it's like when you take a break, you lose people, right? They're like, oh, Holly and Laura didn't show up this week, and like, but I really want to listen to something, and all of a sudden maybe they find something else, right? And then maybe they don't come back to you. So you do have to keep showing up. Do you guys know what the optimal podcast length is? This is always interesting. No. What do you think it might be, the length of an episode?
That's a great question. I would imagine the shorter the better, though, right? Or am I wrong? Am I way off?
No, you're right. Each year, it kind of starts getting a little bit less. But in 2024, right now, it's 22 minutes. So 22 minutes is the optimal length. And because after that, and actually, this is interesting. It's kind of based around the data, but also the average car commute for Americans is 22 minutes. So if people are listening in their car, they finish their drive, most likely they're not going to continue that episode unless it's really engaging, they want to, but usually they'll just listen to that first 22 minutes, and then that's it. So even if you look at your analytics, I know Apple iTunes has this where you can look at the percentage of they listen to of the episode. You kind of see that reflected. So like if you have a longer podcast, one idea is to split it into two parts, right? You'd be like, okay, we'll do part 1 this week, part 2 the next week, and that kind of helps with that weekly consistency as well, where you're like, okay, I have to make less episodes, but I've got some good nuggets. And maybe at the beginning of each episode, you're like, hey, here's why you want to listen to part 2. We've got these 3 great tips coming up, because listening time is valuable.
Wow, that's it. That's a great. Okay, so 22 minutes. I was thinking around that, actually.
Yeah.
For me, I struggle with that as a podcaster, especially with guests, because I just want to keep you all day and just ask you all the questions. It's so hard. It's so difficult. But it makes sense. That's really, really smart, especially with this is why we drop our podcast at 5 a.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, because we want people to have access to it on the morning commute every Tuesday morning.
Yes.
So
Yep.
I think that thought that, oh, if we're going an hour or more, they've already gotten to work, they're not going to keep us on. I didn't even think about that. Oh, already learning so much. The notes are already full notes.
I know, I'm taking notes.
Excellent.
That's amazing. So, all right. So you've launched your podcast. We know to try to keep it, 20-ish minutes. Now let's talk about this elf thing you mentioned. Like, how do you grow it? I don't even know what to ask first. I kind of like, what do you do? What do you do to grow it at this point? You've already launched it. It's out there. Now what?
Okay, I'm going to give you 2 tips for this realm. And right now we're talking about effort-based marketing. So when we think about podcasts, there's 2 ways to grow it. One of it is organic discoverability, so the ways that people find your podcast, and the other is effort-based marketing. So let's talk about effort-based marketing. And so we talk about that. One of the things we're talking about is social media. So let's say your episode drops, you said on Wednesdays, within 72 hours, that's like your window to promote it. And optimally, you want to try to promote it 5 times within those 72 hours, which is it's a lot. It's hard for most people to do that. But for example, let's say we're on Instagram, right? So maybe the first thing you put out is like a carousel style post, and you've got, hey, here's the top 3 takeaways from this episode, and each image is one of those takeaways. So you definitely don't want to just do one static post on Instagram. Those don't do very well, but carousel, people can kind of go back and forth. They stay longer on it. The algorithm likes that. So that could be your first post. Maybe later that day you go live for 5 minutes, and every week you go live at noon on Wednesday and just say, hey, it's Holly and Laura, we're popping in to talk about this week's episode really quick. Here's what you're going to be pumped about. Maybe the next day you have just a short reel, from the interview, just like a nice teaser, some cool juicy nugget that people like. And then, maybe 2 more. Maybe you do like a B-roll of your life, you guys cleaning, who knows, just having fun. And you list, some things you learned, and then one other post, you have to figure out what that is. But there's something where within the first 72 hours with the podcast algorithm, if people keep clicking to the show, finding the show, they will promote it more. Because I know sometimes podcasters are like, well, I do it 3 times, but it's over a week. And then you're missing, that 72-hour window. And also, like, I don't know, for some reason, 5 times is good. You're like, all right, I put a lot of energy into it. Let's get that going. So that's one. The other way to grow, this is one of the other ways to grow your podcast with effort-based marketing. And this is from Adam Shively of the Podcast Business School. He's really great. He's one of my mentors, but he talks about how you got to be down with OPP. You guys remember that song? Who's down with OPP? Yeah, you know me. All right. So OPP is other people's podcasts. So you want to try to guest on other people's podcasts to grow your audience, to network. And that could actually be getting on their show, or it could be something as simple as doing like a podcast promo swap. Like maybe you introduce each other's shows and there's kind of this cross-reference. But yeah, you got to be down with OPP, other people's podcasts. So, maybe for the next 90 days, you're like, okay, we're going to try to hit that 72-hour promotion window, try to do 5 posts. And in the next 90 days, we're going to try to get on 2 podcasts a month. And if you do that, you will definitely see growth, consistent growth over time, because the ability for people to find you is growing, your audience is growing, and then you're reminding people to keep showing up, to keep listening. So those are 2 great tips that really work.
Wow. You are a wealth of knowledge. I am like,
you are
mind blown, because I feel like these tips seem so like after the fact, like, doy, that like makes a lot of sense, but this is just such 72 hours. I would have never known then. Like, we try to spread ours throughout the week because we don't want to post a lot. So what do you do for the rest of the week, specifically with social media? Like, you pack those 5 posts in for that first 72 hours. Then what? Do you keep promoting it? Do you just do general knowledge?
You can not post, or you can just do stories, do like some behind the scenes. But if your Instagram is solely about your podcast, I would just focus on those 72 hours and then don't worry about the rest. Or like if you feel like posting something, post something. But yeah, you just kind of, because again, your focus is just on your episodes, growing the podcast, engaging with your audience.
That's great. That's great to know. We gotta change it up a little bit, Laura. That's what I'm thinking.
Oh no, I know. Trust me, I'm taking some notes. Like,
we've always feared like bombarding people, but I guess I have to just put that aside. And something else you had mentioned, which is so funny. So I'm new to guesting on other people's podcasts, like being a guest.
Yeah.
I'm new to that, and I did this 2 or 3 weeks ago. I was a guest on a podcast, and I mentioned that I have a podcast. But I didn't know if it was, like, rude to name drop my podcast on somebody else's podcast. Like, I didn't know what the etiquette was for that, or if there was one. Like, so So I'm assuming you would drop your name, your podcast name, right?
Yeah,
That's
definitely. Yeah, and even just say, hey, I've got a podcast. It's about this. This is, these are my ideal listeners, or this is who the podcast is for. So people know, who you're looking for or who the ideal audience is. But yeah, it's totally great because you're also promoting, your business, I would assume, when you're podcasting, right? Or what you do. So yeah, definitely. Because it's just another way for people to get to know you, to follow you, to like you. So promote that podcast 100%.
okay. Awesome. That's good to know because I really wasn't sure. I was like, am I being rude if I say this? I don't know. And again, I'm new to it. Like, I've been doing this podcast for a few years now, but I'm new to being on other people. So that's great to know.
Yeah.
Another question I have is, oh my gosh, what was my other question? Okay. So you're promoting the podcast, you're growing the podcast a little bit. Can we talk briefly about monetizing the podcast? I don't even know what that looks like or how to do it, or I'm sure a lot of people who are new in podcasting don't know. So can we talk about that a little bit?
Yes, definitely. This is, I think, a big question a lot of podcasters wonder about, and for good reason. I mean, a lot of us, when we get into podcasting, it's kind of like, I hope someday that I get sponsors or I'm monetizing. So I'm going to approach it a little bit differently. Often people want to know about sponsorship. And while that is an option, it's really, you really have to have a huge following. You have to have 1,000 downloads per episode in 30 days or more, which is the top 20% of podcasters, which isn't most of us, right? It's not most of us. If you're a big name, you're famous, you got it. But even with that, like the monetary return is not good unless you have millions of downloads, because for every 1,000 downloads for an episode, let's say you have a sponsor, they might pay you $15. So think about that. Like, you have 1,000 downloads per episode, you're like, oh, I got $15 this episode. That's not really worth it. So that's why I try to steer people away from that and to think about how to grow your podcast like a business. So for example, you guys, you have a business. So this can be a great way for you to talk about what you do, talk about, like, you could do consulting, coaching on how to start a business. I mean, you two have started your business together and now you've grown it. So if you're a service provider or a coach, or for a lot of people who are even looking for speaking gigs, use your podcast as a way just for people to know you, like you. And as far as like a call to action, I would do a discovery call. Like, you're not trying to sell them a program, but you're just trying to say, hey, these are topics that we're knowledgeable about, we're experts on, we have a lot of experience, and we can help you too. If you're interested in connecting, hop on a free discovery call. You'd want to name it something more interesting than like, this is a discovery call. Think about what's the pain point you're trying to help them solve. Like, this is, fast track to business success discovery call. Hop on and we'll see if, we can help you with some tips. Because it's a low stress, but it's a way for you to connect with them and grow your business. And before you know it, you'll be getting clients, coaching through your podcast because people love and trust you. And it's going to be much more lucrative than trying to chase sponsors or do affiliates. Like, I think, as far as podcasting goes, there's almost like a monetization pyramid where the bottom rung of the pyramid is just like an offer you can offer anytime. It's like people give you, they hop on a discovery call and you're like, hey, we made, here, we know this is something people want. You can do this at any point. It's one-on-one coaching or, like a hybrid course coaching. And then from there you can do other things. But the top of that pyramid is really the sponsorship affiliate, which is where people want to start. But if you want to make money with your podcast, you don't want to go there. You could have an audience, a very small audience, and be making six figures, just by having people connect and enjoy the services, the things that you do.
Wow, that's really good information, because I feel like everybody automatically, when they think of monetizing, I know for myself, I'm always thinking like affiliates, commercials, and things like that. But you just kind of have to get creative with whatever offer you're making, and the key really is to get them to know, like, and trust you to want to, partake in whatever offer that you're getting, which does lead me to my next question, because we've talked a lot about promoting and whatnot. But I'm wondering, what would be some tips that you would give to a podcaster about making sure that the content of the podcast is valuable, right? Because I know that the two main components are education and entertainment. So just what are some things that people can do to make sure that their content is actually something that somebody wants to listen to over and over?
Yeah, definitely. So as far as tips for that, you definitely want to look at your analytics, right? And see which episodes have you done are the most popular, and kind of dig in there. Like, what was it about this episode that people liked? Was it a really great speaker? Was this content super valuable? And then also really reach out to your audiences, wherever they are on social media. And this is a good place to, like on Instagram, for example, in stories, you can do polls, or anytime someone reaches out to you, be like, hey, Can you just tell us, like, what's your favorite thing about our podcast, or what's one or two episodes that you really loved? Because that just collecting that feedback will slowly give you the idea of, like, this is the content that's resonating with them, that's bringing them back, that they're going to want to know about. So, and I know that's something like podcasters often forget about. Like we have all these plans, we have our content, we make it, we put it out there, and then we're like, woo, done. But you do have to make a habit of looking at those, once a month, looking at those analytics and just kind of tracking things. And again, anytime someone reaches out to you about your podcast, don't be afraid to ask them, like, hey, can you tell us something you like? What really resonates with you? What would you like to see more of? Because they will tell you, but it's just getting in the habit of doing that. And so half of that is download numbers, half of that is actual anecdotes from talking to your people, your fans out there.
Awesome. I love that. I feel like we don't do that enough, where we've tried polling people, but then sometimes the response isn't there, and then we get frustrated and we give up. And I feel like it's just a matter of just continuing to show up and do it, and eventually people will start giving you the feedback, right?
Exactly. And another thing too, if you know that certain episodes were really popular, feel free to mention them again. Like, maybe do an episode that's a slightly different take on that topic, and be like, hey, if you want to dive deeper into this, check out episode 55 where we did this. That's not something a lot of podcasters do, is refer back to old episodes that did well, do a different version of it, a different take on it. And then in the show notes, put a direct link to that episode. So it's really easy for people to go back. I saw that you guys do number your episodes, which is great. That makes it so much easier for people to find them, because you could be like, check out episode 26, 47. These are the topics. Because that makes it bingeable too, right? They're like, oh, cool, I'm going to go to this one. I'm going to go to this one. So if you kind of connect them all as you go, like, be really strategic with it. So it's a series is helpful.
That's so tactical. Really, I love that. Yeah, it's so tactical. Yeah. Another question. I don't know if you know the answer to this. This might be a weird one. This comes out of left field, I think. But is there any, if you know this, any statistics on when and what day of the week publishing your episode works more than others, and also frequency? Like, is weekly best? Should we be doing it twice a week, once a month? What is working?
Yeah. Weekly seems to be the best in terms of, habits for people. So I would stick with that. As far as days of the week, I think Monday through Thursday are equally well. Friday's a little, weekends and Fridays are hard because people are doing other things, although people do listen on the weekends. As far as time goes, that just really depends on where your audience is. So if you look at your analytics, like if most of your audience is in the US and they are on the East Coast, do a 4 a.m., 5 a.m. release time, because like you said, they're going to get it on their morning commute. If you look and you're like, oh, I have a big chunk of the audience in the UK, then you want to do a midnight release, because it's going to be the morning, over there. So it really depends on where your people are at,
that makes
in terms
sense.
of times.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think what I'm learning, which I didn't think of, and I know this for my business, is that knowing who you're serving is really important. And, you know, I always say in business, you know, you're not for everybody and all that. And I feel like that's the same for podcasting. Like, you're going to attract a certain, you know, avatar, like a certain listener avatar. I don't know, whatever you'd call it. And I think it's important to know, like, and we preach this in business all the time, know your numbers, know, you know, things like your analytics, who is listening, how long they're listening for, and all that good stuff is important, and something I do not do enough. So it's really good to know, and it's that's definitely my big takeaway from this episode, which is awesome. So I'm excited to level up.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, look at those analytics, make it a habit, and then, you know, pivot as needed based on what is resonating with your listeners. Awesome.
Can you tell me, you know, as we start to wrap up, a little bit about, like, I know you said you produce, and can you just tell me, like, a little bit, like, more in depth of what you do, and what, if anybody wants to work with you and start a podcast, or if they already have one, like, what kinds of things can they expect, and all that goodness?
Sure. Yeah, primarily I am a podcast growth coach. So I either help people launch, like, a really great organically designed podcast that's going to have people find it and grow it. So I've got a 12-week, you know, podcast launch accelerator where it's week by week coaching with classes. So I'll help you build it. I'll teach you how to produce it. So at the end, you can do it all on your own. And it's perfect for, like I said, organic discoverability, and you'll have a great position in place for effort-based marketing. So that's 12 weeks where halfway through you'll have your podcast ready to launch. And then it's 6 weeks of ongoing mini lessons and support as you know, get used to producing it on your own. So there's that. And then for people who already have a podcast but want to really dive in, get better growth, they want to position it better for business growth, I've got two options. So one is a 2-week one-to-one coaching session where we kind of do a dive into strategies to help you grow it over the next 90 days. And again, we look at organic discoverability, marketability, what you're doing there, and put some key strategies in place. And so this is a really great one. If you need some really good strategies, you need feedback on your podcast, but you're kind of ready to do it on your own. If you need a little more hand-holding and accountability, then I have a 90-day, 3-month podcast reboot for growth, where we meet monthly. You have access to me, you know, throughout the business week on Voxer, and we deep dive into strategies to get you the growth that you're looking for, and also to position your podcast in a way that grows your business. I still do a little producing, but I'm kind of shifting out of that and going more into the podcast growth area as a coach.
That's great. I think people need that, because I find that with podcasting, you know, you look things up on YouTube and you kind of just figure it out. But to have somebody to really, like, get tactical with you, and also pay attention to your podcast, and kind of be able to tell you where you can improve, or what you can do differently, or how you can grow what you already have, I think that's really important. And I don't know a lot of people who do that. So I think that's really cool. And I think that people should really jump on this. In fact, I kind of want to. So I think that.
No, I was like, I learned so much from this short little conversation.
Yeah, it's already, it's
That's
so
great.
good. It's so good. So a final question, I guess, to wrap this up is, I don't even know, Laura, what would the final question be? I always love to ask, like, something like a power punch question, and you've already given us so much goodness here. But is there anything, you know what, I'm just going to leave it at this, very open-ended. Is there anything else you want to leave our listeners with today before you plug in all of your socials and stuff?
Okay. Yeah, I guess I'll just say that if you do have a podcast and you know, I know you're putting lots of hours of time into it, making great content, but you've been seeing little growth or stagnant growth, please reach out. I have a free podcast growth discovery call where, you know, I can just pinpoint some strategies for you to try. And I think you'll see great growth after 90 days. I think every podcast really has the potential where you can grow it like a business. And like I said, the magic is that you don't need a large audience to do that. And we talked about this earlier. You don't have to be a Joe Rogan or a Glennon Doyle to have sponsors or affiliates or to have a great six-figure business. So if you're struggling, reach out. I live and breathe all things podcasting, and I'm excited to help. And I really love working with cool women entrepreneurs. So that's my little pitch there. If you're thinking about starting a podcast, please do. It's super fun. I don't know. It was something I was a little nervous about before I even started my own, but it's only been a blast in terms of making connections, really finding your voice and doing something that you love. And I'm sure Holly and Laura would agree with that. So if you want to find me, you can find me on LinkedIn. So it's Rayna Rokicki. It's Rokicki. I'm on Instagram at Podcast Growth Coaching. And definitely check out my new podcast. It's coming out in a couple weeks. It's called Podcast Growth Club. So join the club. Let's grow your podcast.
I
will
love
be joining
that. And
that
of course,
club.
everybody,
100%.
you all know this.
You have given
Me
us
too.
so much
I'm in it.
goodness.
I'm already there. And everything will be linked in the show notes and on our blog and in the description below. So, you can go click all of her links and get to know Rayna better. Clearly, she knows her stuff, y'all. So connect with her for sure. This was a wonderful episode. I'm telling you, the page is full. I ran out. The page is full. So many notes here, so many things to implement. I feel like I've said this before, but we should be charging for this episode because we got a lot of really good stuff here. So thank you so much for coming on the show. And honestly, this was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Holly and Laura. It was a pleasure and a blast being here.